So in the 1990s, we started to get a massive influx of alien-related games, which we can potentially slot into the canon. However, it should be noted at this early point that any game in a franchise which is based off of the events of a movie in the franchise don't exist as canon, as they are just reenactments of the events that have already occurred. And so all of the above listed games are all technically non-canon, as they are just repeating the events that we've already seen in the films. It is also around this time that we find the franchise becomes entangled with the up and rising franchise of the Predator. And so in 1987 we get the first Predator film, and then in 1990 we get the second one, which is set in 1997. And this film in particular is important to the franchise as it establishes a crossover as we see xenomorph skulls on the Predator ship. And so this gives rise to multiple entries in the franchise where we see the aliens fighting off against the predators as the perfect life form is being combated by the perfect hunter. And so our first installment is the AVP 1993 game, which takes place in the year 2493, far ahead of anything we've seen so far in the timeline on the planet Vega 4. It appears that while digging new subway tunnels under their city, the human colonists uncover alien eggs that have laid dormant for God knows how long, and these eggs then cause an infestation of xenomorphs on the colony. They attempt to call for help, however the help transmission is intercepted by passing predator ships looking for game to hunt. Now, this xenomorph infestation appears to be very widespread by the time the predators get there, as a lot of the aliens that we see running around are in fact warrior drones, implying the presence of a queen nearby somewhere. We also find that there are multiple new variants that we have yet to have seen in the films, which have different colour coding and appear to have come from different breeds of animal. There are blue domed xenomorphs which appear to have been created from a dolphin, pink domed variant which were created from a gorilla, red domed variants which appear to have came from a bat-like creature, and also those are created from a snake-like creature as well. Now, what is also interesting is that this breed of xenomorph is revealed to have been not originally on this planet, but has came here a long time ago from the Orion Nebula. And sure enough, when the predators track back to the Orion Nebula, they find an alien queen is waiting here. So this does beg the question of how did the eggs get to Vega 4 in the first place, and also where does this strain of xenomorph originate, as we can't completely pin them down as being of the same strain as the LV426 strain, and therefore the genetics of this branch of alien may be rapidly different, explaining why they have the different coloured dome heads. Now, it is interesting as, even though this is in the far future, the end of the game implies the predators see this as a new hunt, like a new creature to hunt. But given that we see further on in the timeline here that the predators have been hunting these things for hundreds or not thousands of years, so what they may be referring to is this breed specifically in order to make this fit into canon. The only other explanation is that this is a very new predator clan and has never yet actually fought aliens. And it appears once again that we see that the xenomorphs are capable of using egg morphing in order to convert hosts into new eggs with facehuggers inside them, as we see this occurring in one of the cutscenes in the game, implying that this may be how these new strain xenomorphs are reproducing, as none of these new queen aliens that are created from the animals seem to be creating eggs via an ovipositor. Now, the second game that we find here is 1993's AVP The Last of His Clan, which is set in 2593, again the far future, and is on Alpha Centauri 3, which is 8.6 light years away, which is odd considering that Alpha Centauri is only about 4 light years away, so maybe this is like a planet with a very, very elongated orbit. Now, these predators are farming the xenomorphs. They deploy the eggs onto the planet and then intend to hunt the aliens once they mature. However, it appears the predators for some reason are not familiar with the aliens' life cycle, as when they arrive they are overwhelmed by the vast number of aliens, concluding that a queen must be present, implying that they don't understand the mechanism involved in the creation of queens. And I believe this goes a bit deeper, as we see predators throughout the franchise of the games and the films. We have never seen a female predator, which makes me wonder, based on what we see when they become infected with xenomorphs later on in the films, do predators breed differently from humans, and therefore this affects the way they expect the xenomorphs to develop? Now, it appears that this strain of xenomorph opted to use egg morphing as their form of reproduction, as we see when the predator is fighting his way through the levels that there are no cocooned humans that we can see. However, there are areas that appear to be cocoons on the wall which house eggs. So the original infection must have all been drones, and then they created more eggs with which they infested the rest of the colony. And as we see, most of the xenomorphs that we see in this game do appear to be drones, which is difficult to tell based on the low graphic resolution, but it does appear to be a drone and not a warrior. It does appear that at some point a queen did evolve on this colony, however, as we fight it as the final boss. So it seems likely that during the time that they were ovomorphing to create more xenomorph eggs, they inevitably ended up creating a facehugger which manages to get a compatible host to birth a queen. And this queen appears to be relatively new, as it has yet to actually have an ovipositor attached to it and lay more eggs itself. When we find it, it is not in a nest. There are no eggs or anything around it. However, the one oddity that we find with this queen is that it appears to be able to spit acid, which is not something we have seen from any alien queen since. Next, we get Capcom's 1994 Alien vs Predator game, and we see here that the Earth is under siege from alien invasion from the xenomorphs. We find at this point that one of our player characters is in actual fact a cyborg warrior who once fought in the Second Alien War, implying that at whatever point in time this takes place, as we don't get an actual date, there has been at least 2 wars against xenomorphs fought by the colonial marines. Now, it appears that due to the massive amount of human hosts available, it has taken only 72 hours for California to basically be completely overrun by xenomorphs, and the predators arrive to help the humans hunt them down and destroy them. Now, we find that in the Sandrad City area that we have multiple variants of xenomorph that have established themselves as part of the hive. We have stalkers, which I believe are drones, then these appear to evolve into defenders, and then we also have warriors, which appear to evolve into smashers, and then chrysalises followed by royal guards, which guard the queen. And we also find that there are arachnoid xenomorphs, which I believe, based on the way that they move, are most likely xenomorphs that have taken hosts from cats. And then these are the most likely culprits to evolve into the razor claw boss that we see. Either that or the razor claw comes from another larger predatory animal like a big cat or a bear. We discover that the xenomorph infestation is an outbreak caused by a military base who are working with Weyland-Yutani in order to examine and weaponize the aliens. And so we discover that this leads to the creation of infectoids, who appear to be zombie-like humans who are infected by some form of alien matter and then are also capable of being used as hosts. We even see that this same infection can take place for predators too, and I believe that this is due to experimentation on the xenomorphs as we see the base later on, and it's most likely that they are trying to synthesize the aliens' DNA like we see in Romulus, and also as we see the engineers have likely done in Prometheus. And so these infectoids are basically like Fifield. They are mutagenic infected monsters created by exposure to the black goo. Now we see that the company agents and their marine affiliates attempt to escape the planet with what alien material they can to continue their research, and in doing so the human and predator warriors manage to sneak aboard their ship in order to stop them. And while on the ship we discover that the alien queen that they supposedly defeated in the hive has in actual fact survived and has followed them up onto the ship, and so they end up having to kill it on board the bridge of the ship. Inevitably, they are led to stop the alien infestation from spreading any further on the surface of the Earth by ramming the spacecraft into the planet, creating a nuclear firestorm to take out half of North America. And so based on that, we can conclude that this game most likely at some point takes place after Alien 3, although we don't get any explicit dating. However, as we will see in the next video, it most likely takes place before Alien Resurrection. 1994 would also see the release of the AVP Jaguar game. We see the Golgotha military training base, which is run by Weyland-Yutani, has detected an unidentified ship and so sent out a tug to retrieve it, only for the ship to cause an infestation of xenomorphs on the station, which leads to a predator ship showing up and docking in order to hunt the xenomorphs that are now invading the station. And this leads to 3 different scenarios that we can play as. The xenomorphs, who have the objective to free their queen, who is captive on the predator ship, which makes me think there is more behind the backstory of what's happening here prior to the predator ship showing up. The bone ship, or potentially derelict craft, which is taken in by the station at first, has xenomorphs infesting it. However, the queen seems to be on the predator ship, so perhaps the predators have been up to something in the background and now the humans have intervened, leading to them becoming infested and the predators hunting them down. And so that leads on to the Predator campaign, in which the objective is to hunt down the alien queen, who is now building a hive on the station, and basically take its skull as a trophy. So they went from having it as a captive to eliminating it as a threat. And the human campaign shows us a Marine named Lance Lewis, whose objective is to escape from this alien-infested hellhole of a station. And so the campaign basically ends with Lewis escaping in an escape pod, only to be picked up later by the Marine Transport Errata. And in the closing statement to the company, it notes that he has stomach discomfort, which may imply that he is in fact now a host and is about to infect this ship with more aliens. Now, this game never has any explicit dating attached to it as to when it takes place. However, as we see in future installments, there is a point where Weyland-Yutani and the Colonial Marines part ways as partners, so it must occur before then, as Weyland-Yutani are running this marine training facility. And as we see from the sector dating that you get in the cutscenes for this game, it is unclear how this is working as a timescale, as the only thing that doesn't change in the intro is the second half, the 5SC2329, which does, however, upon the end of the game when the pod is retrieved, change to 5SC2330. So the changing of the front half of the numbers makes me think that those are actual hours and seconds and days. However, the change from 29 to 30 on this part makes me think that that is in actual fact showing us the day changing from 29 to 30, which means 5SC23 is the year, which makes me think that this is therefore taking place in 2123, and so therefore takes place the year after the Nostromo incident occurred. Now, the final game that we get before the release of Alien Resurrection was 1995's Aliens: A Comic Book Story. And the reason that it's called this appears to be because it draws from lore from a comic series, in particular involving the character of Dr. Paul Church. Now, as far as canon goes, this timeline that I'm building only includes the films and the games as they are tied together as visual media. Comics do not count as part of the timeline, and the reason for that is that the films often draw from the comics for future installments, and so therefore, like with the logic of the games which are based on films not counting as canon, the comics themselves do not count as canon because they are being used as supplementary material by the franchise. So basically any mention of anything from the comics exists within this canon, but only that which is mentioned. There is no extraneous tying of anything unless that is specifically mentioned. Now, this game follows the crew of the USS Sheridan as they are returning to Earth. However, they are drawn to a distress call from the Proxima Centauri system on the planet Ptolemon. Now, we discover that this is supposed to be a mining base, but is in actual fact a secret lab for experimentation on the xenomorphs, which is run by Dr. Paul Church, who presumably, if his backstory is the same as the comics, encountered the xenomorphs many years ago as a teenager, and so that gives us more implications on when the xenomorphs were active in the timeline. This site appears to have an active hive which features a queen, and so there is a full xenomorph infestation in place here. We also see that a synthetic xenomorph has been created, most likely for infiltration of the hive for scientific purposes. Now, the purpose of Dr. Church's experimentation seems to be to synthesize xenomorph royal jelly, which for some unknown reason one of the characters decides it's a good idea to just drink this stuff when they find it in the lab, and it allows them to have a sort of vision where it links them to the xenomorphs and also to what appear to be engineers which are coming to destroy the planet to rid the xenomorph infestation. Now, this does seem to be very significant, as these are indeed engineers, as they have actual legs and not a tail-like body as we later see the space jockeys presumably have. And so by consuming the royal jelly, it appears that some form of genetic manipulation takes place, which implies to us that the engineers are also tied to the xenomorphs in some way, genetically connected to the hive mind. Now, it is also of note that Dr. Church appears to have also been cross-breeding humans with xenomorphs, which is disturbing to think how exactly that takes place. Now, our player characters reveal to us that Captain Henriksen is a Marine and he joined the army in 2145. However, he is court-martialed in 2154 and stripped of his rank during the Beetlejuice campaign, where he left one of his company to die in a xenomorph attack, most likely implying this could have been one of the alien wars mentioned. We also find that a scientist on the team named O'Connor had apparently witnessed a xenomorph attack at the age of 14 in the year 2126. He also has a degree involving xenobiology, and as it is clearly shown in the films that happen after this point in time, it's presumed that no one actually knows about the existence of xenomorphs, so it is possible that, as we see as the timeline progresses, there are multiple instances of xenomorph attacks throughout the years. However, they must be viewed as some form of urban legend, as no one truly believes they're out there, but there are multiple instances of people encountering them. It's also entirely possible that the colonial forces just cover up any mention of said creatures in order to make sure people don't drop out of wanting to colonise space. Another interesting bit of lore that we find is that the vision created by the royal jelly shows the engineers, and the person who sees these visions believes that they resemble the skeleton that they found in the original alien spacecraft several years ago, implying that the derelict is the original source of xenomorphs. And this also raises the question of, how do they know the derelict is there? Do they know the derelict is there secretly, as we know that the Nostromo visits it and presumably records data of its existence. However, the company don't seem to want to interact with it at all again until Aliens, which takes place after this in the timeline. And so we see our timeline now that exists based on everything up until Alien Resurrection. So in 1987, the Predator attacks Dutch. In 1997, Predators hunt in Los Angeles, and we find that they have xenomorph skulls as part of their collection. In 2122, we get the Nostromo incident, and then in what presumably takes place in 2123, we have the Golgotha incident, followed by a xenomorph attack in 2126. And it appears that at some point within this decade, based on his age, if Dr. Church's backstory occurs in the canon timeline, Then as a teenager, he also is subject to some form of xenomorph infestation. This is followed up by the Beetlejuice campaign by the Marines fighting xenomorphs in 2154, and then in 2158 the events of the comic book adventure take place in Alpha Centauri. And then in 2179 we get the awakening of Ripley from cryosleep and the events of Aliens and Alien Free. And then at some point after this, the events of AVP 1994, where the military experiment on xenomorphs on Earth and lead to an infestation of Sandrad. In 2493 we find that human colonists in the Vega system would then end up unearthing aliens which came from the Orion system, which is where the Beetlejuice campaign is, funnily enough. And also we find that in 2593, Last of His Clan shows us that predators are using xenomorph eggs as a form of sustained farming to hunt.